Okay, hello everybody, and welcome back for our next session of the 2022 Resilience Symposium with our theme is In Awe of Space. And our presenter, our space expert for this session, I think is yet again going to be phenomenal, and I hope everybody's been enjoying the other presentations. I'm Dr. Jeff Thompson. I'm a research scientist with Columbia University in their psychiatry department. And part of the idea of bringing this all together, if you're trying to understand more on awe, for the recorded version, we'll have a 2-minute video that explains the concept of awe and how it ties into other resilience practices. And as I'm about to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sarah Whiting, one thing, and I'm not going to put any pressure on you, Sarah, at all, but from some of our earlier presenters, we've had one of our presenters had a phone call from an astronaut from the ISS while the astronaut was up there, calling her on her car phone. We had another presenter that deals directly with astronauts in their training for pre, post, and during missions. Then we just heard from another presenter who actually was the one utilizing the Mars rover to take photographs of the surface of Mars. So really, really impressive stuff. And what we're going to hear from Dr. Sarah Whiting, and I'll just give you a brief introduction, Sarah, and then you can add more what you'd like. But she's the deputy element scientist of what we call, or what she calls, space flight analogs and research operations, and the integration element, which is part of the human research program at NASA Johnson Space Center. And I've been fortunate enough to work with Sarah in a limited role in some of the other research that I've done with space experts on awe and resilience. And we heard a very tiny little bit from Dr. Lauren Blackwell Landon, this concept of analogs, and it's Sarah's area that really she does work in, and it's just truly, truly fascinating. And I'm ready to stop talking. I'm ready to start listening to you. So on behalf of all our attendees, thank you so much for being here and sharing this really, really incredible work that you and your team is doing. So it's all yours.
Excellent. Well, thank you. That's a great introduction. Let me see if I can share my slides here. But thank you all for the wonderful introduction and the interest in this. I am a self-proclaimed NASA nerd, and I love to share NASA with everyone, particularly those outside the agency or kind of different diverse fields within psychology and other fields. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do in the field of spaceflight analogs. So as Jeff alluded to, spaceflight analogs are operational environments that we specifically design for the purpose of doing research. We run missions, full spaceflight-like missions in these types of facilities, and we study human health outcomes relevant for spaceflight that just isn't flight for various different reasons. And I'll talk mostly about one type of analog that we have at the NASA Johnson Space Center here in Houston called the HERA, or the Human Exploration Research Analog. We love acronyms at NASA, so I'm going to try my very, very hardest to not give you alphabet soup during this talk. But please feel free to ask questions if I do happen to use some that don't make sense. So big picture first. The Human Research Program at NASA, our mission or our goal is to help enable various different spaceflight missions going forward, especially exploration missions beyond Earth. So at the left-hand side of your screen is the International Space Station. And we humans have continuously occupied low Earth orbit for over 20 years now. So we have continuously been in space for 20 years, which is not something the general public generally has a good grasp of. That I don't know if NASA does a poor job of kind of communicating those types of milestones, but we have been in space for 20 years continuously. And just recently, we've started partnering with commercial providers like SpaceX and Boeing to start flying our crews up to the International Space Station. We've also recently had a private astronaut mission. So private company Axiom has flown private citizens, not astronauts, to the International Space Station through an agreement that we have with them. Eventually, their goal, Axiom's goal, is to build their own space station for private astronaut visits, so kind of more commercialization of space travel, opening up to a broader set of people. And then very, very recently, as of last week, we went out to the moon again in Orion. So the Orion vehicle launched a couple weeks ago. It orbited the moon. It's an uncrewed vehicle for this test and came back just on Sunday. The purpose of that is to start enabling humans to get back to the moon, to start doing lunar research as well as human health research in and around the moon. Eventually building a space station around the moon called the Lunar Gateway to more enable kind of more permanent or longer term exploration of the moon, all in an effort to learn everything that we need to know to how to protect our crews, how to live in long duration space, how to live farther and farther away from Earth, so farther and farther from resupply, that kind of thing, eventually enabling us to get to the moon, to humans to the moon. To Mars. So we're about halfway there in this chart, but that's what's coming next. When we talk about resilience in space or space flight, human space flight, we have to keep all of these different scenarios in mind, because it's important to ask resilience towards what, or resilience against what. Each of these scenarios is very different, has different parameters, has different risks. So we have to think about all of those types of things. And that's where these 5 spaceflight hazards come in. And I'm hoping that some of my other colleagues might have talked about this. So I'll kind of briefly introduce you to these things if they haven't. But NASA defines 5 major categories of hazards of spaceflight towards the human system, or the person. Altered gravity is the most obvious one, that, there's vestibular changes in your inner ear, there's fluid shifting going on where, without the pull of gravity downwards, kind of fluids can shift upwards. There's deconditioning because you're not using all your muscles. There's muscle atrophy, there's bone loss because of that loss of gravity. Various physiological type changes happen because of altered gravity. So you can talk about resilience to those physiological type of changes. There's the hostile closed environment, which really means that you're kind of living in a tin can. It's a closed environment where you're not getting inputs really out from other sources. You're not connected physically to other things like the ground, and it's a hostile environment in the sense that the environment outside of your vehicle is incompatible with life in some way. So this is implications for kind of how the vehicle is designed itself, whether it's designed around the human or the human is kind of forced into the system that isn't really designed well for them. There's all kinds of acceleration, noise, vibration, toxic chemicals that can happen with rocket fuel and coolants and you name it, right, just to keep these systems going. But then there's also internally, you have a closed loop system for water filtration, your food system, and also within that kind of a risk of decreased immune functioning because you're kind of in this closed off bubble, right? Space radiation is another one that we think about more and more the further and further we go from Earth. We're protected relatively in low Earth orbit by the Earth's magnetosphere, but further and further out, we're less protected. And so we have to think about that kind of risk and any resiliency that we can build into the system for that. As well as distance from Earth, that right now in low Earth orbit, we can resupply, we can have regular communications back and forth, we can video chat, we can Zoom, or the equivalent of Zoom to space, right? You can get a phone call in your car from space, like Jeff was saying. The farther and farther we go, the less and less communication ability we're going to have. That bigger and bigger distances away create a communication delay. So Mars, at the furthest point in the orbits, can be a 20-minute communication delay one way. So you can call home, but they're not going to hear you for 20 minutes, and you're not going to get a response for another 20 minutes. So that creates a whole lot of difficulty around needing to be more autonomous from the ground, so not having mission control help, as well as not having resupply, so having to bring everything with you that you're going to need. The fifth one is the one that I deal the most with as a psychologist, is isolation and confinement. And I think this is something that we all had a little bit of a taste of during the kind of heavier lockdown periods of the pandemic, of just really being socially isolated from each other, physically isolated from from other resources, kind of having a sense of sensory deprivation where we're not getting our full sensory experience out in the world like we usually would. You can have sleep and circadian changes because you're not getting all the cues from your natural environment, especially sunlight environment. To help keep the circadian rhythm in check, as well as difficulties with team processes and team coordination, which I think Dr. Landon had talked about in a previous presentation. So all of those hazards we try to replicate in our flight analogs. Analogs are any kind of environment that has a similar type of effect on the human systems to those that we would expect to see in space. The analogs that we do don't necessarily replicate all 5 of those things all at once, because it's very hard to, replicate zero gravity on Earth, right? For obvious ethical reasons, we can't irradiate people, unless there's a clinical, implication for that, like cancer treatment or something. But there, we can study effects of isolation, we can study effects of communication delays, we can study effects of closed system environments or limited food system environments, things like that, through these analog processes. And we do this, for various different reasons. The first of which is that it's an opportunity to get a larger sample size in a shorter amount of time than if we were doing this in flight. Right now we fly crews roughly twice a year to the International Space Station, so every 6 months or so. Roughly kind of 3 to 4 people per crew. That's 3 to 4 people every 6 months for a research study, and for very small sample sizes that may not be enough to answer questions in a relatively quick amount of time that we might need to start developing some of these systems for future flights. So with an analog, we can kind of run as many missions as we need to in a shorter amount of time to start boosting that throughput of research. But we can also use it as a proving ground that spaceflight is very expensive. To launch some new technology or new systems, is very, very expensive endeavor. If it's not well proven, if it's not well designed and resilient in and of itself, we have to send it back to get it fixed. That's very expensive. So we can use these analogs as kind of a middle ground to kind of validate some of these new developments or technologies that we might need to eventually put into space. So the big one that is my baby is the Human Exploration Research Analog, or we call it HERA. That's, I think, the only acronym I'm going to use in this talk. HERA is a roughly the size of it kind of maybe a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment, maybe not a New York City apartment. It's 2 stories. So it's a cylinder main habitat area, and then 2 modules on either side. We have an airlock module on this side and a hygiene module on this side. Hygiene module has a single stall shower, a sink, and a toilet. I'll kind of run through what each level has. But this is our mission control center. It's much, much smaller than a normal mission control center. Our real MCC looks a lot bigger than this. You've probably seen pictures of it. Ours is a scaled down version of it, but we do have MCC to help replicate that aspect of flight. So this is the first floor, kind of bird's eye view looking down at the first floor of it. There's 4 main stations on the first floor. The core here, as you can kind of see in this picture, is a ladder that's has kind of a cage around it for safety. It also has an elevator that goes up and down. So if you're carrying heavier things or you have more, 2 people that need to go up and down at the same time, you can use the elevator function of it. Each of these stations this is mostly kind of a work area. So these are different kinds of operational stations. So this is a medical station or biomedical research station. So there's a med kit in here. There's different biological experiments that we do at this desk. Kind of a multi-use facility. Next to it over here is a glove box where we do a lot of experiments with rock samples and things where you'd have to be isolated from the sample that you're taking. Then we have an ops center. So this is the flight deck of the ops center where we do a virtual EVA. So we don't have folks actually leave the habitat. They do it in a virtual reality environment, kind of like an Oculus goggles type thing. We have 2 crew members in the airlock that are on the surface. So they go through a whole procedure just like any other crew members would on ISS to decompress the airlock, to prepare their suits, do a virtual suit check, those types of things to prepare for a surface EVA or extravehicular activity. Sorry, I lied to you. I used an acronym. The other 2 crew members are sitting at the flight deck here, and they're operating a robotic rover that works along with these other 2 crew members on the surface. So we have two members in the habitat, and then 2 members doing a surface operation. The other work centers here, one is a robotics task. So this is a simulator that runs a kind of a robotic arm called the Canadarm that is used for grappling various different things. You can kind of move things from one part of the station to another with it. You can also grapple cargo vehicles to bring them in safely, various different operations. This is an operational task simulator. And then the blue area here is kind of a multi-purpose workstation where you can do lots of repair tasks, lots of group activities. The desk folds up if you need more space for the floor, things like that. Then the second level is more of a living, kind of multi-purpose space. So we have a wardroom table that serves everything from your kind of work desk area to your kitchen counter to your meal times at this table. The galley over here is very small. It's equipped with a food warmer, kind of a microwave type system, a water system, but that's it. So there's no oven, there's no cooking, there's no sternos, nothing like that. The water that you have here is for rehydrating some foods. So we have lots of foods packed in these crates that are kind of all over the habitat. They have all of their food that they need in this one habitat without getting a resupply. And then above this center are kind of these lofted bunk areas that you access through ladders here. This is what one looks like from the inside. It's roughly the size of a twin bed mattresses. This is open though, so that there's limited privacy, just like there would be on a real space vehicle, that you can see each other. You maybe have a curtain or something like that, but other than that, it's not a private crew quarters, because that's kind of what we would expect in a typical space vehicle. There is opportunity for exercise, but it's very, very limited. It's an exercise bike and then a small weight bench on this side for some hand weights. So what do we do in this facility? Is we run space missions. A friend of mine once put it that if anyone has ever played Dungeons and Dragons before, that you get to be the dungeon master, you get to make up your own space mission, figure out what's going to happen, throw challenges at the crew, all these kinds of things. We try to make it as flight-like and as realistic as possible. So we use a real flight-like timeline. We limit their access to, internet, TV, phone, things like that. You can't bring your iPad with you. You can't bring your cell phone with you. Creature comforts like that are not allowed. We use surveillance and video and audio system for some of the research. We also use flight-like operational tasks. We give them everything from public affairs interviews that they have to do, like media interviews, to all those simulated EVAs, housekeeping activities, anything you would really have to do in a real research or in a facility, a spaceflight vehicle. We standardize the conditions as much as possible so that, and this is why it's more of a research analog than real life. Is we have some level of standardization to experimentally control certain variables. So we can control certain things in the cabin, like the light dark cycle of the lighting in the system. We provide certain exercise requirements or exercise prescriptions for the crew to try to adhere to. We do provide them 3 meals a day. It's shelf-stable packaged food. It's not quite the freeze-dried food like the astronaut ice cream that you might buy, at the gift shop or something like that. It's not like that. It's a little bit more like camping food, if folks have eaten that before. We do a dietary assessment to make sure that we're meeting basic nutritional needs for the crew. And like I said, they have hot water, but no cooking or baking facilities. This is an example of kind of what a timeline looks like. They're timelined down to the minute. Just like they are in spaceflight. Every minute counts. Right now we run crews roughly 4 times a year. We have 4 people per mission. Occasionally we assign backups to the crews as kind of, something comes up in the pre-flight period where, illness happens, family emergencies, things like that. We can have someone step in as a backup crew member to keep the mission on the same timeline. Our goal is to try to get a 50-50 ratio between male and female crew members within a campaign. So 1 campaign equals 4 missions. So 1 mission is 45 days. We run roughly 4 missions per year, and that makes it a campaign. That gets us a sample size of 16 people per year, which is a lot more throughput than we can get on the station. We try to keep our subjects, the subjects that we select for these crews as astronaut-like as possible, both in terms of age range, as well as their backgrounds, kind of advanced STEM degrees, professional skills, their reasons for wanting to do this, their motivations for wanting to do this are pretty flight-like. They also go through medical and psychological screening, just like astronauts would. So what do we use HERA for is kind of the big question, right? We run these fake missions, we kind of simulate a mission, but what is the science going into it? The resilience science that we're looking at is largely related to behavioral health type issues, specifically individual behavioral health and performance, but as well as team interaction, performance, cohesion, cultural factors, especially now that we're working more and more with international crew members. We're very interested in kind of cultural factors and how that plays out. Sleep and circadian issues, because we have that controlled environment with the lighting, as well as various different types of human systems tests. So the habitat, the way the habitat interacts with the people using it is of critical value to NASA. That if we design the habitat correctly, design the systems correctly, the habitat can run more autonomously, that we don't need MCC support like we have in the past. So if we start integrating some of these new technologies to help the crews become more autonomous or less need less support from the ground, that helps us accomplish our future missions. We also do some mission enabling capabilities or validations. So new food systems, when new foods are developed, new scheduling tools are developed, different procedures or concepts of operation. Some of our operational teams at NASA can help implement some of those as kind of, testing it out before we fly it. Telemedicine operations is a great one that, in a comm delay scenario, so we delay communications up to 5 minutes in our HERA habitat. So you can't have a teledoc visit, in every 5 minutes you get a response. That doesn't necessarily work. So we have to look at how we do telemedicine in a more delayed scenario like that. So we have opportunities to test new capabilities before we have to actually use them. I wanted to go over a couple of examples of how we do this. One is this is a lighting study. So this lighting device that you see right here is actually on the International Space Station. This is one from ISS. Just like kind of bulbs that smart light bulbs that we might have in our houses, that you can the hue bulbs, things like that. You can change the color, temperature, the intensity, the brightness, that kind of thing. These devices are capable of doing some of those more nuanced changes to how light is projected. So you can change the intensity of the light and the color hue of the light. We know that more blue toned or blue hued light is more activating. It's more alerting. It helps you stay awake and alert better. So when there's critical operations or lots of kind of daytime activities where you might have to be very alert to details and things like that, You can have these kind of more blue-hued, brighter lights to help you stay in that, that the right circadian phase to remain alert. We tested this in HERA because in HERA, one of the campaigns that we looked at, we put the crews through a partial sleep deprivation procedure where on the weekdays, they had 5-hour sleep opportunities. That's it. And most parents with young kids probably recognize that I would love 5 hours of sleep. But we also recognize, right, that at the end of that 5 hours of sleep, you don't feel your best, most refreshed, most alert. Our crews feel the same. And we want to know, in sleep, in space, whether we can help the crews be resilient towards that kind of sleep deprivation stress. Can we help the crews through either lighting procedures like this or other means to help the crews remain cognitively alert, remain cognitively sharp, stave off, the kind of irritability, things like that come with sleep deprivation. And in this particular study, we were looking at a lighting change for this to help crews stay alert in the face of this challenge. And what we found was that there were some good results just with the lighting intervention alone. So no melatonin, no caffeine, no other things to help people stay alert. Just lighting alone can help the circadian rhythm stay in alignment and in some ways perform slightly better even in the face of sleep deprivation. So really resilience in the face of sleep deprivation. So it improved, kind of some small improvements in cognitive performance, just self-reported, kind of more better alignment between bedtime and feeling sleepy, as well as kind of biomarkers of circadian rhythm, kind of your melatonin and other types of blood markers for your circadian rhythm. And similarly, another one that we found that we tested was a food bar study. So this is a study where we were looking at how do we feed the crew without launching, lots and lots and lots of food. That if you need to get out to Mars could be, a 2-year mission or something like that, right? How do you bring 2 years worth of food with you that's shelf stable? And one thought that NASA had was condense it all into these very dense food bars, right? So instead of a giant meal, you have this very small food bar. And this was an opportunity in HERA to test the effectiveness of these food bars. That how would crews actually eat it? Would it maintain their weight? Would it give them the nutrition that they needed? And will it be palatable? Can you actually do this? Eat this for a certain amount of time. And what we found is, people get sick of eating a food bar every day, right? Not much variety there, but that it did help people maintain what they needed, in a short amount of time in that 45-day mission. That there were some limitations that people wanted more flavor, more variety, that kind of thing, that eating a very, very dense food bar like that is hard. It's like 750 calories in one sitting. That's a lot of food. But that it's a trade that, in a short amount of time, this might enable shorter missions for us, be more resilient in the face of some of these challenges. And then lastly, kind of some other areas that we've started developing is looking at resiliency in terms of being able to test people's cognition in flight without having ground interactions. So can the crews learn how to administer a cognitive test battery themselves and use it themselves without the expertise of being a neuropsychologist like myself? Similarly, looking at kind of ways that teams can help detect changes or concerns within themselves, using lexical analyses, things like that. Developing tools to help us evaluate different designs for spaceflight vehicles, as well as kind of usability and acceptability of different communication strategies, inventorying strategies, all the kinds of little nuanced things that we all need, right, in a space mission. And there's a lot more to share, but in a nutshell, that's what HERA does. It's one approach to how we study resilience without actually flying.
Excellent, Dr. Sarah Wyden. I appreciate that a lot. It's incredibly comprehensive, incredibly interesting in so many ways. I was writing in the chat box to the group, and just so everybody knows, the chat box is open for questions and comments. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are either in column A or B. And as you're presenting that, the column A people are like, oh, sign me up. I definitely want to do this. And then there's column B, people like, absolutely not. And I think maybe you might have gotten a few more people in column B when they saw those food bars. Those did not look very good. And I'm trying to be open-minded. And I know promotes open-mindedness, but only so much. Maybe I'd try one. I don't know about 45 days. Before we bring it into our professional expert panelist, who we have is Steve Joyner. He's the dean at the College of Leadership and Public Service, also the executive director at the Institute for Conflict Management at Lipscomb University, which has a sidebar, having a connection with them. They support a lot of the research that I do in addition to my work at Columbia. So Steve, thank you always for your continued support. I didn't say it earlier. Again, it's not advertising, but I've changed my shirt for each session to promote companies and organizations that I find value in. And this is also, among many other things, them doing great work. Reminds me to make sure that I'm living my life and enjoying the things because of how precious life is. I've got two short, quick questions for you, Sarah. Then, Steve, I'm going to throw it to you. The first one is just based on what you shared. The second one will be an all-related question, but I'm thinking, with these, when you do the HERAs, the different groups, what's the biggest issue that you found that amongst the participants? Like what are, whether it's human behavior, personal human behavior, interactive, or just not being able to work with the equipment? What's been the biggest one that's that you've found?
It's really diverse, actually, because each campaign that we do, we have a different theme or different focus. Of the types of stressors we might throw at them. So like I was kind of describing, one campaign was centered around this kind of sleep deprivation issue. So in that one, obviously the sleep deprivation issue is kind of a big stressor for folks. That kind of has a lot of impacts across the board in terms of physical health as well as kind of mental health. Other ones that we've thrown at crew, though, are more kind of challenges of increased autonomy, that not having as much support from a mission control center, ground support type of thing. So the team has to work a lot more autonomously to solve problems that, even if you don't have the same level of expertise, you still have to figure out how to solve that problem.
Right, because I imagine you're trying to replicate the process for going to Mars because of the extended communication. One thing that I wonder, and if we have time, come back to it later, is I just think about boredom and and I'm not saying this to be funny, like that could drive somebody crazy. And then if we're in a tight little group, like those images you shared, as much as I think the three of us could get along really well, if you, me, or Steve got bored, I think we'd get on each other's nerves. But maybe if you could address that later, if we have time. The all question for you is, doing this amazing work and having talked with you more extended periods of time, it's pretty awesome, pun intended, not intended. What's one moment for you that stuck out for you with the work that you're involved in, where it was truly, now that I'm asking you, like a moment of like wow, or like if you don't mind sharing with us?
I mean, there's several. I almost have moments of awe like every day, and I'm not kidding you. Like this is why I was born to work at NASA, is because I'm a huge NASA nerd, and this is just my thing. But one of the biggest ones for me is I became a specialist in that robotics operations simulator, that Canadarm simulator, and I had never actually seen it in real life. I had just only ever known this computer simulator. It's kind of like, it almost looks like a video game console, and I got good at it, and I taught other people how to do it, and I use it for research and all these things. And then one day I was watching NASA TV, on YouTube, and watching an EVA happen, and all of a sudden, kind of next to the crew member, I saw one of these docking or these grappling targets that I use in the simulator. It's about the size of a large dinner plate. And I saw it in real life and went, oh my God, that's what I'm actually doing. That's what I'm actually, when I'm doing the simulator, that's what I'm doing. And it just kind of dawned on me, the big picture of like, wow, this is, that's, because it looks like a video game, and you feel removed from it in some ways, kind of working on the ground with these analogs, that it doesn't feel like spaceflight in some ways. But then when you actually see the real thing translated into real life, you kind of have this big picture moment of, that's what I'm contributing to. That's what I'm really doing.
Yeah, and that again, tying that to resilience, connecting dot. That's where it sounds like you find not just your passion for what you do, but the meaning and purpose, and then that sense of small, but also being part of the collective. I don't know, Steve, if you want to jump in, maybe some key takeaways from what she shared, and if you have a question or two for her. Steve, you're on mute.
There you go. Yeah, fantastic. Because just the point that Jeff was making, Sarah, I want to come back to you. Jeff talked about doing something huge and awe-inspiring, and still in these small, detailed, technical things that you have to address, right? And I live my life kind of that small, detailed, technical side. In other words, NASA has all this technology and all this unbelievable stuff happening. We're talking about being in awe, Jeff, just being in awe of what they're capable of doing. At the same time, I spend my life thinking about what it would be, the dynamics of four people in that small space for long periods of time. And there's all this theory around, communication theory on what happens. I mean, you're like a lab. So you get this lab for how things can go south. Let's get four really highly successful, incredible people. Let's shove them in a really small space for 45 days and see how they do. So before I make any comments, I love to say, do you guys ever look at just a team dynamics? I know you do some testing. Tell me a little bit about what that's like to have highly competitive type A people in this small space. Could you talk about that for a second?
So first, you're right in the sense that everyone we select is very accomplished. These are individuals that are, every time I meet a new crew, I'm just constantly impressed by, they blow me out of the water of, I could never do that in my life, But we also select individuals specifically for these kinds of team interaction resilience factors. And that's how NASA selects our own astronauts, our kind of real astronauts, as well as our analog astronauts, is we're looking for what's called expeditionary skills. A set of skills of how people get along well, how to live together in a small confined space without getting on each other's nerves, or if you do get on each other's nerves, because it will happen, there's no way around it, of repairing that relationship, of kind of getting past those bumps in the road. Right. So we do look specifically for, just like we select our real astronauts, we select our analog astronauts in the same way, kind of looking for some of the same skills. But we also provide them, we also do some research where we're looking to challenge some of those relationships, to kind of
some really good
problem solving, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's some really good work by Salvador Minuchin, who is a psychologist who did a lot of work on group interaction and hierarchy. And, Minuchin talks a lot about it. In any group of any size, there has to be almost really clear hierarchy / decision-making process. And that if left to them, sometimes you can figure that out on your own, but if that becomes the constant model, it's stressful. Do you guys kind of address hierarchy decision-making patterns in that, or is that left to them to figure out?
In some ways it's left to them, but we give them a little bit of structure for it. So each individual, the four people does have a specific mission role. So there is a commander, there is a mission specialist 1, a mission specialist 2, and a flight engineer that we assign them those roles. The commander tends to have a bit more responsibility in that sense of kind of leading the crew and kind of being that kind of guide. But we do train them on certain things of how to communicate with mission control, like what are the standard communication patterns over the radio, some structures around that kind of thing. But for the most part, because we're also testing that independence piece, that autonomy piece, we also we don't want to give them too much structure, because we want to see what works for everybody. If one crew tends to have a really good interaction or style of interaction, that's really good information for us to learn from that. So we don't want to give them too much structure and tell them how to do it.
I think it's fascinating, because I think you talk about a conflict communication lab. This is it. I mean, one of the things you want to do, I think, is to stress them and see how they do.
And some of the research we do, some of the research we do might be interventions like that to build team resilience. So kind of pre-mission, some kind of training in conflict resolution, or that kind of thing, to then compare to a cohort of of missions that have not gotten that training or gotten a different type of training. That may be kind of some of the resilience research that we do.
Well, I wonder, Sarah, sorry, Steve, just to jump in
Oh,
real
sure.
quick. I'm thinking, has anybody, and I don't know how else to word it, but have you ever had participants fail? Like,
Yeah.
you're not doing
My
what
next
we wanted you to
question:
do.
how'd it go
You're eating
south
all the
on you?
cookies. You're I don't know. You're not brushing your teeth. I don't know, or you're just a jerk. And how do you handle that?
I mean, there's certainly things like that happen. We're very careful in that we select individuals that have kind of the baseline level of kind of group living skills, so that it's a risk for us, because if we don't select well or kind of at a baseline level, and if something really goes south, we have to end the mission early. Ethically, we can't, put people in in too bad of a situation, or, cause a fight, or, those kinds of things that we do have, safety monitors and that kind of thing to just to make sure, that those kinds of things. Luckily, we've never had that, we've never had a knockout fight. We've never had, those kinds of things. There's always conflicts. There's always people who are, hummed at themselves and tap their pens and are irritating, and, those kinds of things. But that's real life. We hear that on station as well, that just, if you're going to live with your set of 4 or 5 people for 6 months at a time in a confined space like that, that's life, and we all know, from living with our own families and, all of that, right, that those things happen. But it's about how we address those things, or how we repair breakdowns when they do happen.
So it sounds like I hear you saying there's a certain level of team resiliency that you're almost looking for / testing for on the front end. That ability, stealing Jeff's term, resilience, this ability to do well and light up, right? That's kind of one of the things you're looking for. Now, this is a really one of those, in medical terms, almost HIPAA. You only can tell me something HIPAA doesn't cover. But what if it's going to go south with a team, relationally as a team? What in your experience has been the kind of thing that does that? So you got really pretty confident people. It can all go south at some point. What are the types of team that will drive it that way? Is it competency stuff? Is it relational stuff? You see what I'm saying? What is driving the difficulty when it arises on your teams?
It tends to be pretty varied, but it tends to be more different styles of communication, okay. Or different personality clashes, that just, very, very dominant personalities, or personalities that, that we talk about leadership as well as followership skills, that both are equally important to NASA.
Right.
So if you're skewed one, way too much on the leadership side and not enough on the followership side, or vice versa, that could become a point of contention, with other folks, that everybody is equally accomplished, maybe in just different areas, different skill sets, but everyone is equally as accomplished, equally impressive, but if you go in with the mindset of me rather than us, right, that can sometimes, cause frictions. NASA's approach to this is the first line of defense is selection. That we build resilience within a team by selecting individuals that already naturally have some of those, personality skills or team cohabitation skills, experience in, isolated environments, military environments, things where you have to work together as a team. And then from there, building up, further skills from there, kind of formal training, or, formal experience with smaller crews, that kind of thing. So it really does start with the selection process of just kind of a baseline, good group living skills. But there's other things that we can do on top of that as well to help facilitate, privacy, that when you have that, that person that's just kind of on your nerves that day, and you just need to be, I need to go off and do my own thing for a minute. That becomes a habitat design issue. That having, the ability to talk to somebody about that, or to problem solve, using a structured system, or, something like that, are the things that NASA is really interested in, especially as we start looking out, to the moon and beyond, like Mars and that kind of thing.
Great. Yeah, I don't want to take all of Jeff's time. I have one more kind of
Go
comment.
for it. Yeah. Go for it, Steve.
So I hear you saying pretty clearly that the way you develop these teams, because I'm really fascinated by how you're going to take 4 people, 6 people, 8 people, put them in a capsule, do a 2-year mission outside of the nasty food. I'm sorry, that's going to be a problem. Is that number one, there's selection process. I'm sure it's really intensive where you can come up with this. You guys have decades of experience that. Second, pretty clear communication structures and models on the front end. Here's how we manage these things, right? And then I think it's really fascinating that I know from the previous lectures, the rotating leadership and all that's part of it. But I think the key is people having the ability to engage, having the personality and the ability to articulate what they're struggling with the team in a positive way, right? And taking the negative and casting it in a way that team members can use that to move forward, and that's what I've heard. I don't take any more time, but I think that's what fascinates me is, along with all this technical expertise, you've got to figure out how to move that forward. And I'm not going to say anything else, but it'd be fascinating to know if you ever introduce crisis into your team when they're in those moments, to see how they manage it. So anyway, those are all just the observations I'm bringing forward. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And Sarah, I guess if you could answer just as yes or no in the interest of time, because somebody asked that same question, Steve, in the chat box about do you introduce crisis scenarios to see how they'll handle it while they're there?
We do. We have planned and unplanned, events that, because we want to see, we in the NASA, terminology, we have nominal and off nominal, that's our phrasing for it. But, crews have to both problem solve the nominal stuff, the just how do we, follow this procedure and make sure that we're doing it well. Mm-hmm. But we also, when a situation arises, an off-nominal situation arises, an alarm goes off, a system stops working, there's a leak of some kind somewhere, those kinds of things, right? That we also want to see how our analog crews respond to those types of challenges as well. So just like a real space mission, we do, have a kind of catalog in the back of our heads of some of these off-nominal situations that we do plan out. Depending, it really does depend on the scenario, the campaign scenario. So if the scenario is focused on any one particular area, we might choose something that goes along that theme, or that kind of thing. We try not to do it all the time. We're not just every single day throwing in 12 different surprise, now this alarm is going off, because that's not realistic either, but it is really important to see kind of response to a known and unknown type of situation, because those two things kind of draw very different reactions and different personalities in some cases.
Yeah, which is right. That's a good point. We're out of time. I know we could keep going for many more hours. We have another session soon, so we can't do that. And I know Sarah and Steve, you both have to go in separate directions. But truly, I really appreciate both of you, Steve, sharing your insights and questions. Sarah, it's just, and you're wonderful, and the work that you're doing is really amazing. And I appreciate you taking the time to share it with all of us. Thank you very much to you, and on behalf of our audience, thank you very, very much.
Thanks for the invitation. We appreciate it. Great stuff. Thanks, Sarah.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for the interest in it. Love to share it.
Here's a quick explanation of awe, why it's important, and how it's connected to your overall resilience and well-being. First, here's a definition of awe. Awe is a complex emotion we experience with something or someone that is extraordinary and challenges our current thinking. Awe is primarily positive, and the vast research shows it can help us with feeling calmer, reduces our stress, promotes pro-social behaviors, gratitude, creative and critical thinking. It helps us find meaning and purpose in our lives. and it can make us feel more connected to others. Awe can be elicited in different ways, including in nature, space, the arts and music, spirituality, in the company of others, and through accomplishments, both ours and others. Awe can be a gateway to other resilience practices, too. The good thing about awe is it doesn't have to be complex or time-consuming. Research has shown it only takes a few moments. Oh, and let's be clear, awe can be experienced in those once-in-a-lifetime moments, like a trip to somewhere exotic or the birth of a child, but it certainly is not limited to those types of moments. If our mindset is open to experiencing awe, we can experience it in our daily lives at home and at work. It's all about perspective, and you control that. Awe moments are there if you make time for it. We all deserve to have positive mental health. That certainly includes you, and it's not selfish. It's smart.